Oh, really? Well, no, I think it's always right. It was, you know, it was kind of. Yeah. Yeah, worse, and I say. It's yeah, California. We're. Moses. Yeah. Yeah, he's everyone, so it's fun to work with him. Now he's yeah. Yeah, he's certainly difficult. Moses is working. Different though. I live in Schenectady. I'm here for yeah, well, at least you see this way. I understand now. Well, I'm very well. It's fun. I'm glad well, I already know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Sylvan Plan Commission meeting for January 19th. First order of business is to ratify the minutes for the last meeting. Do I have a motion to ratify the meetings? Second? Second. Okay. All in favor of ratifying the meetings for the last minute, say aye.
Yes.
Opposed? The minutes have been approved. We have two items on the agenda tonight. First item is a parking determination at 7800 Austin Avenue. That's case number 2023-01 PD. And then afterwards, following, we'll have our discussion on affordable housing. So, first case tonight, park determination, 7800 Austin Avenue. The proposed UPS distribution facility. The representative here? Yes, come on up.
We have a few representatives. Okay, sorry.
Okay, would you have everybody that's in your part come up and introduce themselves?
Great. Louis, do you want to come up, and anyone from UPS who's here? I'm Doug Klein. I'm with Bridge Development Partners. We're the developer for the project.
Good evening. My name is Louis Abuna. I'm a principal with KLOA. We prepared the traffic and parking study.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Watkins. I'm the project engineer for UPS.
Matt Rosinski here, project manager for UPS.
Gentlemen, thank you. Andrew, all of you raise your right hand, please. You affirm tonight that the testimony you give is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth to help you.
I do.
Yes.
Thank you. Continue with your presentation.
I believe that we provided everything that ahead of time that we needed to provide. So I don't really have anything additional to say at this point in time.
Anybody else in the group, you have anything to say or offer? Okay. Who's going to present the case? Paul? Okay, present the staff report. Paul Reese. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, good evening. Paul Reese, planning manager.
think this is my first time presenting to this body. Happy to be here. So case 2023 1PD parking determination for the petitioner Bridgepoint Skokie LLC. UPS intends to operate a delivery distribution center. The proposed facility is approximately 171,000 square feet. The building will serve as a transfer point between feeder trucks and long haul trucking and package cars. The site will provide a 72 space parking lot on the north side of the proposed building and a 228 space parking lot on the east side of Austin Avenue for on-site employees and package car drivers. The zoning is M3 and the proposed land use truck and freight transportation services is permitted. Staff has reviewed the petitioner's traffic impact study by KLOA dated December 14th, 2022. And staff accepts this analysis and recommends that the 300 on-site spaces be required for this use. That's basically it. This is kind of our new version of parking determinations to come to this body in this way. So this is the first one that we're doing. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
How many shifts are they running? Are they running continuously, 24/7?
I think that would be best suited for the applicant.
We will have 3 shifts that are there that are divided up over the hours, but we will not be continuously running through the whole day.
What's your heaviest shift?
Our heaviest shift will be early in the morning, very early in the morning.
And you attribute that traffic to incoming trucks that are bringing or outgoing?
At that time, it would just be employees that are driving into the facility at that time, just to move packages. That's it.
Oh, I see.
And then once the packages are done being sorted, if you will, then package cars will leave. Otherwise, our heaviest shift is in the morning. Yes.
When do you get shipments in?
We'll get shipments in pretty much early in the morning and throughout the day, but the heaviest one again is just in the morning.
Okay.
Yep.
Any questions?
So this is more like a distribution center, like you have it in the North Group,
Say it one more time, please.
is a distribution center?
Yes,
So this is another location after North Group or
this is a relief from Northbrook. Yes,
so you're closing the premises?
we are not closing that location.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Yep.
Paul, anything else you want to offer? Or
No, sir, that's all.
is there anybody in the audience with a question or comment on the parking determination for the UPS facility? Not seeing any.
We might have.
We have somebody? Please. Give us your name, please, your address.
Lauren Gradnicki at 8818 Colmar.
Thank you.
I was wondering,
You speak into the mic.
I was wondering if we, the public, have access to the plan and what the parking lot is going to look like.
We have a picture of the parking lot. Paul, do we have a layout of the parking lot?
I don't have it with me, but I could provide a site plan if that's of interest, sure.
Since it seems like this is still kind of in the planning stages, I would like to have, I would like to give you a lot of feedback about the kinds of things that I've been talking about at the village board meeting since May. I think that right now you're at the position where you could insist on certain sustainability measures, including having swales to kind of channel the runoff from the parking lot so that it won't go all into the sewer systems.
Well, we're not, this case does not address that. We're mainly determining if the parking lot is capable of handling the traffic and is able to park the cars. That has been determined by the building department. All the other particulars as far as the land usage and how it's laid out.
Okay, thank you.
That's what.
I'm only 5 months in, but I believe this particular property came to the planning commission and the board last year at some point, or within the past 24 months. So, but this is just determining the number of parking spaces for the use, so there's no other action, and this does not go on to the board, this is just a part of that planning commission exercise.
Yeah, this board is the final determining body for park determination, so this case will not go to the board. Any other questions in the audience? Okay. I'll need a recommendation for the commission. Motion.
Motion to approve as presented by staff.
For a second.
Second.
Thank you. For the vote, Commissioner Oosley,
Aye.
Commissioner Mensah,
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw,
Yes.
Commissioner Franklin,
Aye.
Commissioner Giuliano.
Aye.
And I'll vote aye. The motion passes, and again, this is the final determination. And that's it. Good luck with your project.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda is discussion on affordable housing. And let me read a statement. At the December 20th meeting of the village board, a motion was made to direct the planning commission to develop a affordable housing policy recommendations to the village board by the end of the first quarter of 2023. We take up this process tonight in a listen and learn session to gather information and feedback from experts in the field. Community members engage on this topic and start to generate discussion within the commission. We will hear 5 presentations from representatives from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, the Bryn Shore Development, the Housing Authority of Cook County, Community Partners for Affordable Housing, and Housing Opportunity Development Corporation. We anticipate each presentation to be about 10 to 15 minutes long, with time at the end of each presentation for commissioner questions. Following the presentation, we will welcome questions and public comments from the audience. Village staff will be taking notes throughout the meeting, but if you would like to also submit written comments to the commission, we'll accept these as well. The site has been set up, the site is housing@skokie.org. That's housing with a uppercase H. And that's the village site that's set up for comments on affordable housing. And this is the email that will accept written comments or feedback on these matters. At the end of the public comment portion of the meeting, the commission will engage in a brief discussion in order to provide staff a list of and directions on areas of affordable housing policy that we believe warrant further development, research, and consideration for inclusion in this body's recommendation to the village board. At our next meeting on February 2nd, in this very room at 7:30, we will seek to further research and define these policy areas for our recommendation, then finalize our recommendation to the village board at our meeting on March 2nd. Also at 7:30 in this building. The village staff prepared materials for our review in advance of this meeting. The materials include a summary of different work the village is engaged in today, including the 2020 document, the village's commitment to affordable housing, summary of the work of all the communities that have undertaken, and resources through the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning toolkit. The matter of affordable housing is one that is multifaceted and the development of new policies represents the opportunity to further enhance the work of the village as already, which was already done to preserve and create affordable housing while opening new opportunities to build new village policies to make us a leader in addressing affordable housing in our community. We look forward to a robust, productive, and respectful discussion and providing recommendations to the village board in March. Without further ado, we'll start with our first speaker, Jonathan Birch from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. Mr. Birch?
Come over here.
Yes.
Beautiful. Just making sure I got myself oriented. So evening all, my name is Jonathan Birch from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. Thanks for having me out here tonight to speak a little bit about housing in the region, affordable housing and Skokie. As we talk a little bit about housing, I think, hopefully since I'm batting lead off from a whole bunch of different presentations, you're going to hear a little bit about housing tonight. I think there's some overarching things that's helpful to think a little bit about, and hopefully one of the main takeaways that you'll leave my portion of the presentation with is, one, you're not alone. Lots of other communities in the region are thinking about housing issues. And two, when you think about those, there's a lot that can fall under that umbrella of housing or affordable housing. And that one of the most important things for Skokie will ultimately be determining what are those most pressing housing issues for you all. Because the more you're able to drill in and answer that question with specificity, the better you'll be able to think about what sorts of partnerships, tools, resources, changes, other actions that you'll want to take to be able to target and address those issues. Because there's a lot that can fall underneath that banner of housing or affordable housing. What you see on the screen is actually results from CMAP's most recent municipal housing survey. Every other year, CMAP reaches out to municipalities across the region to ask them to provide us a little bit about issues and topics that are of importance to them across the region. We most recently did this actually between August and October of this year of 2022. So the year that just passed. And as part of that, we included a question on there asking municipalities to tell us what they described as their most pressing housing issues. There were 12 different options. You can see them up on the screen. We got answers across the different board, right? People, when we ask them to talk and think about housing issues in their community, they respond to that sort of question in a variety of different ways. Sometimes they're thinking about existing homeowners who might be older in their community and thinking about what they're going to be doing as they're aging. Other communities are thinking about rapid increase in housing costs, whether that be ownership costs or rents. Other communities are thinking about the condition of their existing housing stock and how units are going to remain affordable in the long term. So there can be a lot that falls underneath that banner. And that's why it's helpful for you, as I said, to think about what are those issues that are important here in Skokie. And again, the more you're able to drill in on the answer to that question, the better position this community will ultimately be able to be to choose the types of interventions or actions or ordinances or other sorts of things that will help you best be able to address that problem. So answering this question is paramount. So might be helpful to talk at a high level a little bit about housing in Skokie. If CMAP is going to come out and do a presentation, we're going to want to talk at least a little bit about data stuff. We certainly do love our data. A little bit about that context, right? This isn't going to go into all the levels of detail that you really could go into if you did a sort of a full housing plan for a community. They include all those different aspects and ultimately different levels of detail. This is just starting to skim the surface, to just touch that top level and start to give you stuff to think about of different ways and ultimate opportunities to be able to dig more into different housing issues here in Skokie. Well, the important things to think about is that housing isn't just a local issue. It's also a regional issue and a national issue, right? I'm sure we've all probably seen articles that talk about concerns around the number of housing units that are ultimately being built here in the United States, the impacts that have on that has on affordability and the supply overall of housing. In our region, one of the main drivers in lots of places is whether or not we're adding people. Our region, Chicago region, isn't really growing. Our growth rates since 2000 have been very, very low, and also both in terms of population and in the number of households. That said, that doesn't mean there aren't affordable housing issues. What you see on the screen is looking at population and household numbers here in Skokie between 2000 and 2020. That gives you a sense that's similar to the region. Skokie also has been relatively slow growing, both in terms of the number of population and households. I think at a regional level, one of the things that always stands out is number of households are growing faster than the number of people, which tells you what? It tells you that the number of people living in any one housing unit is decreasing over time, right? Smaller households, fewer people living in each of those units. Skokie actually stands out a little bit in that regard. There tend to be more number of people living in every housing unit in Skokie than in other parts of the region. There's about 2.8-ish people per housing unit, where it's below 2.5 in most of the region. Next thing to talk a little bit about is what types of units are here in Skokie and whether or not people are owning or renting in each of those different units. So what you see on the screen is broken out whether a unit is owner or renter occupied and the share of the folks who are owning or renting within each of those different most common buckets, single family, townhome, and then multifamily. Like a lot of the region here in Skokie, the majority of the population lives in single family homes that they own. That doesn't describe everyone though, right? There are people in Skokie who are renting who live in a single family home. There are people who are renting and live in a multifamily home. There are people who own a unit in a multifamily building. You know, that really does speak to the diversity of different housing types that are already present in Skokie, and may also speak to the fact that there may be a demand for other additional housing types. And I think from talking with Joanna a little bit in advance of this, I know part of the conversation may be also spurred by new residential development that's happening here in Skokie, and thinking a little bit about the demand for that. I'm actually going to jump to this one to talk just a little bit about cost burden. We talk a lot about affordability, and when you dig into that, one of the most common ways to talk about that is in terms of cost burden, which thinking about the share of your housing housing costs that you're paying out of your income on a monthly basis. So how much of your income is going to pay for housing costs? We're going to start by talking a little bit on the owner side, and then we're going to jump to talk a little bit about on the renter side. Generally, the rule of thumb, which you probably saw in some of your pre-reading materials, is to look at that no more than about 30% of your income is going to housing, is towards your cost of your housing. When you think about each of those different components, one of the things to think about is whether or not it's that 30 to 50% range, which would describe you as cost burdened, right? You're over that sort of 30% threshold, or above 50%, which means you're severely cost burdened, right? That's someone who's half of their money is going to pay for their housing cost. And that can lead to other sorts of challenges. Those are the folks who, right, an emergency pops up, whether their car goes out, or they have an emergency medical bill, or something goes wrong with their house if they're owning a house. Those are the sorts of things that can really challenge their ability to stay in that unit successfully. And we know there's so many other positive things that comes from someone being able to stay in their home successfully. This is looking at that change over time. So if you see those blue and green bars up at the top, that's what it was in sort of 2010 to 2014 range. Down below, that's 2016 to 2021 range, starts to give you a sense of how cost burden here in Skokie has changed over time for people who own their unit. The thing that I think really stands out here is one, right? The share of folks who are paying between 30 and 50% of their income on housing costs has gone down. That's a good thing. But at the same time, the number of folks who are paying more than 50% of their income towards housing costs is about the same as it was before. Right? Those are the folks who are really especially stretched to be able to stay in their units. It doesn't mean it's the same people in each of those two time periods, right? Folks cycle through for a variety of reasons, including a lot of the housing instability points that I made before. But those are folks who are especially at risk. This chart may make your eyes bleed a little bit. There's a lot going on here. I think the main things to take a look at and to think about is we've got 6 different income bins along the bottom of the graph. And then as we look at each of those bars, the dark blue and the 2 different shades of green, it's helpful to think about what each of them is talking about. The blue is looking at the number of households at that income level or in that income bin. And then the green is looking at the number of housing units that are affordable at that income level. Again, like with lots of this data, you can drill into this more and continue to slice this to really explore the nuance behind this. This starts to give you sort of an overall sense of, for owners here in Skokie, where are those affordable units found and who's cost burdened? You see, right, there's a big gap down here at the bottom where there's a lot more people than there are affordable units, right? Because it's hard to be able to afford a unit, to be able to own a unit if you're bringing in less than $20,000 a year. And we see that most of the units that are affordable, there's that sort of light shade of green. Those are people who don't have a mortgage on their home, right? It's easy, when we think about typically on home ownership, a lot of people, when they purchase a home, purchase it with a mortgage. There's a lot that goes into that in terms of your mortgage, your interest, property tax escrows, things of that nature, all those different things that go into an owner's cost. This starts to give you a sense of where those affordable units are found. You see that sort of gap at the bottom indicates there might be some affordability challenges like we talked about towards the bottom. There's a big gap at the top. Those are people who have more substantial income and can have the ability to be able to pay far less than 30% of their income towards housing costs, as opposed to people sort of further down the income spectrum. But I really want you to look at that sort of light green. Sometimes I like to think about this as sort of a shadow affordable stock. It seems like it's there. And when you look at other measures that might be out there, it'll seem like it's out there. Those are units that are affordable to somebody making, $30,000 a year, $40,000 a year. But they're not really there, because a lot of times those are units where someone has, lived in the unit for some time, been able to pay off their mortgage. It's affordable because they're no longer doing that. When that person comes time to sell, I think we all know that, the next buyer is more likely to come in with a mortgage. And in that case, will it continue to be affordable at someone at that range? Those are certainly the sorts of questions to start thinking about. We can do a similar sort of conversation on the renter side of things. You can sort of see up there, same sort of picture, looking a little bit at 50, looking at cost burden in the two different time periods. Again, you can see that it's gotten a little bit for those in that 30 to 50% range as in terms of renters here in Skokie. But again, a persistent 25% or more of renters here in Skokie are paying more than half of their income towards housing costs. And so that raises a question about whether or not those folks will be able to stay in those units successfully over time. And this is a similar sort of graph to what we just talked. Yeah, of course.
You're talking about a single wage earner, correct?
No, so I'm talking about a household. So that's a good question, right? When we talk about the sort of additional nuance that you can dig into here, right? These are not adjusted for household size. So, right, there is a mix of people, like in this income bin here, $20,000 to $20,000 to just below $50,000. That's a mix of people. A single person who might be, just one person living in a unit who might be, earning that income versus a family of four who might be earning that income. And so it is a mixture there. That's what I mean by this is just sort of a top level analysis, but there is that sort of additional detail you can go into, really dig into those sorts of questions. This gives you a similar sort of look on the rental side. Again, I think you can sort of look at those gaps between the dark blue and the green at the top end and understand why rental developers are excited about proposing new rental units here in Skokie, right? There might be demand there and the ability for folks to be able to pay for more expensive or higher rental units here in town. But at the same time, you start to see again the gaps that exist as you move down the income spectrum, especially for those making less than $20,000 a year. We've talked a lot about data here in Skokie so far, but again, I want to come back to that original question of what are the housing issues you're trying to address? What are those key, most pressing issues for you all? CMAP actually had worked in partnership back in 2017 with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, the Metropolitan Planning Council, and the Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul University to develop something called Regional Housing Solutions. This, I think, is an especially interesting tool because it starts to get to that next piece of the puzzle and something that I think will be helpful for you to think about as you hear from the other speakers tonight, which is especially getting at that question of like, we know something about the data, we start to think we know what those issues are. How do we link those up to solutions that have been successful in other communities with similar market characteristics, similar housing demand, similar situation to Skokie, and what have they been able to do successfully in that? Through the work with DePaul especially, we were able to break out the region into 8 different housing submarkets. And this sort of gives you a sense of what they are. There's a pretty map on the region of like how they iterate or differentiate across the region. I've got a handout for you that'll show you the one, so the snapshot for Skokie, which was really primarily in submarkets 4, 5, and 6, which are very common in sort of inner ring suburban areas, especially towards the North Shore. You can see that green, which is sort of that first wave of post-World War II development in places across the region. But I think what's also interesting about this isn't just thinking about submarkets, thinking about similar sorts of communities with similar market characteristics, but it's also being able to think about how that ultimately ties back to, those issues, those common issues and solutions. And so that's where, if you go to the Regional Housing Solutions website and the handout that I'll pass around to you in a moment, you'll see that there are those sorts of, that's structured around identifying common issues and then strategies that link up with them, including, I think, some of the ones that you'll have an opportunity to hear from some of the other speakers tonight, that'll help start to give you a sense of which ones make sense. Most of Skokie is in those submarkets 4, 5, and 6. I also brought along submarket 3. The data that underpins this, as I said, was, site was created in 2017. The data underpins that's probably 2014, 2015 vintage data. Housing market has certainly changed since 2015. I think everybody in the room can sort of understand that. I did bring along the one for submarket 3 that may have some characteristics to really speak to sort of the development boom that you're seeing right now. That tends to be some of the most development prone regions or parts of our region, in places like Oak Park and Evanston and parts of the north parts of the city of Chicago, where there's been a lot of additional demand for development and some strategies around common housing issues in those areas as well that might be helpful for you to think about too. But again, as I started off, I want to come back to, again, really being able to answer this question, which is what are your most important housing issues, and then devising strategies that respond to those are really important. Because again, there's a lot of different tools in the toolbox. It's about knowing whether or not you need to pull out a hammer or a screwdriver and which type of screwdriver. It's not, do I need a toolbox and do I need some of them? It's which ones do you need? And so hopefully through your process over this and the upcoming meetings, you'll be able to sort of drive and help answer that question. So thank you for your time. If I wanted to pass these around, should I just hand them up to this gentleman here and he'll pass them along? Beautiful.
Any questions of Mr. Burke? Commissioners? No? Okay, sure. Peter.
I just want to ask the most general question, which is the specific recommendations that CMAP might present, are they drawn directly from the set of data that you highlighted here? And just in general, I'm curious as to how the data that you just presented relates to the Chicago neighborhoods and other municipalities that we share a border with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if I probably went back some slides, I didn't pull up the super zoomed in map that starts to give you a sense of how that sort of iterates across the region. But I do think you'll see that there definitely are, when you think about some of the surrounding communities, you do see consistent geographic patterns around submarkets that are common across the region. Age of housing unit was a common important driver in that. So I do think you'll see, as you look at some of your surrounding communities in places like Lincolnwood and Niles and Morton Grove that are nearby, you'll certainly see some of those components that are iterated again. There are some similarities, differences with Evanston as well because of its slightly more dense format. But again, we talked a little bit earlier that, with the housing market here and now in 2023 is different than it was in 2017 or in some of this data is vintage 2015. And so those might be more important for you to be able to look at as well. It's why we provided sort of a mixture of those sorts of things. But I do think, again, sort of thinking about those common issues are really important. And that's really the benefit of being able to sort of go to the website, poke around. I encourage you to do that and really be able to look at what some of those common issues are. So these come from best practices that CMAP and its partners have been able to use in a variety of communities across the region over time. We're always sourcing new ones. But these really speak to ones that are time tested and have worked well in their markets with similar circumstances. So a lot of the data that I showed you is sort of the most top level version of some of that. There's a lot more that data that ultimately went into the development of these, but it starts to give you a jumping off point for that.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's a question here.
We're gonna take questions after the end of all the presentations from the audience, okay? Next is Mr. David Britt and Peter Lavari.
Great. Good evening. Thanks for having us. I'm David Brint with Brinshore Development. We're headquartered here in Evanston. We've been doing affordable housing development for over 30 years now. Probably have done. Where's my clicker here? I've done over 10,000 units of affordable housing in 100 developments. We work in 22 states now around the country, even though we started and are headquartered here. And our expertise is in all sorts of kinds of housing, but in particular, the redevelopment of neighborhoods. Let me skip this. Like I said, we operate in many communities in the Chicagoland area, and it says 18 states, but it's 22 now. So I want to build on what you just heard. The issue really is who are you, and who do you want to be? Who do you want to serve? Demographics are an interesting way of looking at things. You look at the demographics and you say, here's the income distribution of the people that live in our community. But you also have to break things down by subgroups, seniors, people with special needs. How do you use housing as an economic development tool is an important issue. Is that something that you want to do? Or are you just trying to build housing for populations that you decide that you need to serve? Because we use housing often as a tool for trying to encourage other activity in communities, whether it's artist housing, or whether it's housing for people of I said special needs, but different kinds of special needs. And that's how you start segmenting populations within who you're serving in affordable housing communities. Senior populations in particular, you want to really take a hard look at what those senior populations are. And senior populations break down too between, a senior is 62 years old. I'm a senior as of about 3 months ago. But senior populations now go up till 90, and they really segment between 62 and 75 and 75 and 85 and above 85, and who it is that you need to serve in your community. A lot of seniors are in homes. They've been in homes for a very long time, and it's difficult to free up housing stock to bring young families in if they don't have alternatives to move to. So you need to take a careful look at those senior populations too, if they're qualify as affordable, and they usually do. Some of them are low income, some of them are middle low income, that's 30 to 80% of the area median, and some reach up into 120% or above. But you need to try to look at whether that's a target population that you want to serve, because of the ancillary benefits to your planning in your community. Like I'm saying, there's gaps in there's gaps in the affordable housing. You saw statistics presented to you that very low income people have trouble finding housing. That's true. I mean, that's typically very true. The cost of building housing is significant. It's $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a unit. And the rents that those folks can pay are usually only $300 or $400 a unit. So they don't exist in the marketplace very much. That's where communities have to step in and make a decision about, is that a target population that we need to serve? Do we have enough very low income people here for whatever reason that we need to serve? I think we often find in communities that people that are challenged for incomes are challenged for different reasons. I mean, families that have domestic problems, divorce, whatever, they have difficulty staying in your community, finding affordable places to live. We've had strategies, and I think Peter will talk to it in a minute, in communities like in Highland Park, where we tried to create housing there for families that wanted to stay in the community, wanted to own and wanted to raise their children there, but had financial stress. The last thing that you want to think about is what are the trends in your community? Are you gentrifying? Is this happening in Skokie like it's happening in other communities where as units turn, prices are escalating to the point where you're going to see more and more difficulty with affordable housing? And then how do you deal with those issues?
I just click something real quick.
There you go. And real briefly, okay.
I'm so sorry, hold on.
And like I was saying, real briefly, you're looking at, and we'll give you some examples here of housing for workforce housing, mixed income housing, which is unrestricted units and affordable units, or housing for very low income people, so that you're looking at different kinds of structure in the way that you would target affordable housing. And senior housing is its own vagaries that you need to try to address. And then there's looking at rehabilitation of homes. In several communities, including Evanston, we rehabilitated 100 homes, turned them from structurally obsolete into functional affordable housing, which we sold and rented. Larger buildings, special needs buildings, I mentioned those things. And then I think you'll hear more about inclusionary zoning, incentive zoning, land banking. Don't worry, Rob, I'm not going to steal your thunder. And then targeting how you actually secure those kinds of opportunities. Here.
So what do I do?
Just press this wheel. Just move the wheel.
Thank you. First of all, my name is Peter Levavi. Thank you so much for inviting us to make this presentation. I'm a Skokie resident and I've lived here for 10 years. And I moved here specifically because I love this community because of its diversity. We chose coming to Skokie because of Niles North High School. We really think it's one of the best in the area. And we feel very strongly that this is a great community and we want to make sure it stays that way. It's an entry port for immigrants and people who really want to strive for the American dream. And we just love this community. So thank you so much. The other reason why we chose to come here was the high level of services provided by the village. And, you really do a great job. But what I'm here to talk to you about really is to show you some examples, not in the abstract, but real projects that we've built in the Chicagoland area and the North Shore near Skokie that will kind of whet your appetite to what is possible. So in Highland Park, you'll hear more about the land trust, but we worked with the land trust to take some land, a TOD site right near the Metro, to build 10 affordable townhomes for workforce. And we did get subsidies from IDA to assist doing that. We got the land for free. And in exchange for the land, we were able to build 4 rental apartments that are very affordable. It's an incredible model that meets the needs for providing workforce housing, people who are school teachers and firemen and police, etc. In a for sale context. In Evanston, we worked with the NSP program in the city to build new construction, rental housing, affordable, right near the Jourdain Center, really good neighborhood. And we built beautiful rental housing that's affordable using the low-income housing tax credit program. And that's a theme you're going to hear a lot on rental housing, how important the low-income housing tax credit program is in financing new construction rental housing. In Deerfield, we're soon to break ground on a new construction 25-unit project that combines half affordable rental housing with half permanent supportive housing that's subsidized using project-based vouchers so that very low-income people who are disabled could live in that housing. It's going to be a new construction project that'll break ground shortly. In Chicago, this is probably the most ambitious project we've done. It's a mixed income, mixed use, new construction project built at the corner of Clybourne and Division that has on its ground floor a daycare center that provides slots for very low income people alongside very rich people. It's a true mixed income development. It's got 16,000 square feet of commercial on the ground floor. It's got all kinds of activities that promote the community within the building to bring all the income folks together. There's everything from community gardens on rooftop to beekeeping. So we're very deliberate about it. Again, this is built with low-income housing tax credits provided by the city of Chicago, but could have also been provided by IDA, the State Housing Finance Agency. In Highland Park, we built a senior development that combines both for sale and rental within a single development. Again, this was built in conjunction with the Land Trust. It's got 60 affordable apartments. 48 of them are condominiums that sold for a very low price, and 12 are rentals that are also very affordable. And it's right in the downtown area, really wonderful project. Again, it was, this one was not built with low-income housing tax credits, though. In Melrose Park, we addressed the seniors in a different way. We worked with 2 other developers on a senior campus on North Avenue that has 3 different facilities, and we built the independent rental senior building on that campus, 94 units, affordable to people across the income spectrum. And it's been around for about 15 years and it's doing beautifully. It's really a great property. As David mentioned, in Evanston, and this is something we like to do, we were able to acquire 100 single-family homes, townhomes, and condominiums, renovate them using government subsidies, and then put half of them back on the street as for sale, very affordable. We sold them for approximately $200,000, and then rentals for half of the units that are affordable to families at 50% of median income. It was an incredibly successful program to mitigate foreclosure. And it's one of the only examples in the country of how the neighborhood stabilization program eliminated foreclosure in a neighborhood. It was very effective.
And I assure you, we did not enjoy doing 100 individual homes.
I just want to interrupt to ask, who did you acquire the homes from?
So they were all foreclosed. So they were acquired from banks, from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and
There was a system set up to help. Sell. Sure. There was a system set up by the government to try to dispose of properties that were REO by the banks and foreclosed. So we were able to we acquired them that way.
And I just want to say, none of these were our ideas. These are ideas that come from the community, from the municipality, from the housing authorities we work with. So we are really problem solvers in real estate, and that's how we approach things. And that's why David is stressing knowing what niche you're trying to address, and then we can figure out a solution to it. Right here in Skokie, we worked with HODC to renovate some very small multifamily buildings so that it could bring affordable rental housing right into the community without even knowing it. And you can see the addresses here. So there's some on Niles, Kilpatrick, Keating, and Niles Center Road. We've also heard that there's some buildings that are larger, older multifamily buildings that could be acquired and renovated. And we've done a lot of that as well, especially in the city of Chicago. Here's an example of a 19 unit building that we did with neighborhood stabilization funds, where we were able to get the building that was acquired through NSP funds, and then they lent us NSP funds to do the work, and we put a mortgage on it as well. Half of the units are very affordable for 50%, and the other half are at 120%. So it's even mixed income within that one building. And then here we have a supportive housing building that we did. We took an SRO that was 101 units and we deconverted it into 51 beautiful apartments that are managed by thresholds. They provide a high level of social services and meet a very important need for people who are chronically mentally ill. And they do an amazing job. It's a fabulous facility. A lot of people came together, the city, the state, and the federal government all contributed to this project, and it's got project-based vouchers on it that make it extremely affordable for the people who live there. And finally, I just wanted to show you that this is a historic building that's in Logan Square that we renovated with commercial on the ground floor, an art center on the second floor, and 24 affordable housing units above it, using the low-income housing tax credit program, TIF, and historic credits. It really anchored the north end of Logan Square and led to a lot of the additional investment that has gone up and down Milwaukee. This is kind of the northernmost point where the investment has taken place, and now everything is filled in between the statue and this building. It's pretty amazing to see. And anyway, I just want to turn it back to David to talk about some of the ideas.
I'm going to leave these because I'm sure that Richard and Rob are going to talk about some of these tools that we use, and tools that you're going to have to think about a little bit about how you when you figure out who it is you're trying to serve and how you want to serve them. So we'll leave those for you. So I'll leave it with one last thought. Many of the projects that you saw there were built on land that was a constructive nuisance. Either had significant environmental problems, or the neighborhood did not like what the other uses for it were. City typically had some involvement in acquiring those properties and turning them into different kinds of affordable housing. So that's something that you might want to think about in the future as you develop your strategies. Happy to take questions.
I've got one. It's going to take me a minute to get there, so I apologize. You talked about truly mixed-use developments at one point. I'm going to discount that because I'm going to assume that the affordable housing component that's in a successful mixed-use development is in some respects subsidized by the market rate rent. I'm discounting that. The question I'm asking is to your day job as a developer. So you talk, the three things you have up here are zoning, different form of zoning, and land banking. I'm curious though as to what is the vehicle that you feel is most efficient to actually transition and transform stagnant or delinquent properties into viable, affordable housing that people can live in. And I ask specifically because while the developer might have a certain level of altruism and discount some of their fees and costs, and you know, a zoning change might facilitate a certain type of housing, the GC is not going to discount their fee. The individual trades that are going to do work are not going to discount their fee. So there has to be something else inside the process. So I'm curious as to whether or not you would point to the financing that is provided through IDA, or what you hinted at, the various different types of strategies through tax increment financing in certain districts where that's available, et cetera. I'm just curious as to what you would suggest is the best vehicle to help a project that is close to going forward, actually move forward.
I'll answer your question, okay, but I'm going to go back to what I said before. Depends on the targeted population. The targeted population is lower income. You need a lot more subsidy. So you have to go to IDA. You have to use.
Let me add to that. So specifically, you showed some townhouses there and you showed a couple of single family homes. In large part, that is the housing stock that is ripe for rehabilitation and so forth, right? There are some buildings, as you pointed out, to fit those other categories. But what's available to be transformed is largely single family. And in some respects, that's the hardest to transform. So that's why I'm asking the question.
So if you're asking about transferring that population, there are a variety of programs, subsidy programs that you can attract. And then you're really trying to satisfy a population that's probably between 80 and 120% of the area median income. So the idea there basically is you acquire something for $250,000, it takes $100,000 of rehab, and you resell it to the target population at $210,000. there's $140,000 of subsidy that's needed. That's what you're looking for. And that can come from a variety of sources. One of the reasons that some communities have done things like a tear down tax, that they do inclusionary zoning, so with an opt-out fee, is that they can repurpose those dollars from a market rate project back into the city and back into a subsidy that you target in particular. You can acquire, we did some of the projects that you saw in Highland Park with funds from IDA. In a different program than they normally do for the lowest population of people. So philanthropy in a lot of communities we now find will support affordable housing development. So it really gets back to that discussion of who you're trying to serve, what populations you're trying to serve, and then once you decide that, then we try to help you, or you try to figure out what those tools are to write down the cost to make them affordable.
So if I could just add to what David is saying, what we've seen is the most effective way for a city or village like this to drive the process is to acquire land and then put out an RFP for it. And then they know who they're working with and they can get the product that they're looking for. And it puts everybody on the same side of the table so that we could work together collaboratively and not wait for developers to come with a proposal. And that is how we do a lot of our work. We respond to forward-thinking municipalities who have decided that they want to solve a particular problem in a particular location. And then we can help them solve it by getting the subsidies. Just because it's called affordable housing doesn't mean it's less expensive to build. In fact, in many cases, it's more expensive because we have all of these unfunded mandates, Davis-Bacon, all kinds of things that we have to do in order, once we take the money, that costs us more to build than everyone else. And I just want to say that we don't ask for a reduced developer fee. Everybody who does affordable housing is under very strict rules on what developer fees can be. And so it's not, we don't have a market rate arm to our company. This is what we do. We build affordable housing.
Just one clarification, and I promise I'll stop. The land banking and the acquisition of property by municipalities, surely you see success in big cities like Chicago, maybe medium cities like Milwaukee. Are you seeing success in smaller communities like Skokie with similar strategies?
Well, we did in Evanston. No, sorry.
In Highland Park?
We did in Evanston and we did in Highland Park. I really think you're gonna, when you talk about land banking and how to do that, Rob Anthony's gonna talk to you about that. Okay, because that's what we started in Highland Park. We helped to create the inclusionary zoning there, the land bank, how they generated dollars, how they reinvested them, and to bring the cost down and then keep them affordable over the long term. So, but it's a reasonable question. It's not easy. When we said we did 100 units, it's because we got $17 million from the government to do it. And that's why when you're trying to do it at some scale, you have to find those sources in order to reinvigorate some of the communities that have the deteriorating single family homes. Okay, I think any more questions?
All right, thank you. I'd like to move this along.
Yep. Sorry.
That with, Mr. Montino. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Rich Monacchio. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Cook County. The presentation we just saw was the exciting one. Mine and Jonathan's was even exciting compared to, I don't want to totally downplay it. So what I want to do is really sort of give an assisted housing 101 here. I think, the things that we've already talked about are really phenomenal. I mean, the things that Brinshaw has done, the things that Richard Koenig has done and Rob have done, but they're not easy. And especially for folks that don't do this on a daily basis, it's complicated. So I thought it would help the commission and the village to do that. So I'll just start, let's see how this. How did you do this, David?
You just roll the.
You can teach us.
Oh, down here.
Just use this arrow.
Thank you.
Now just move it forward.
Thank you. So this is just a ribbon cutting. We like to do this. So that's President Parkwinkle. For the Housing Authority was created in 1946. You know, a lot of folks confuse us with the Chicago Housing Authority. So we operate in the suburbs. 130 municipalities total. We ourselves own and operate 18 developments. And actually that number is low. It's probably about 20,000 households served now. So, you know, it's a lot smaller than the CHA, but it's a lot of people. And the fact is, if we had the resources, we would be able to, we know this because of the responses to our wait list openings, 5 times as many people need the help as actually get it, 5 times. Demographics. The housing authorities tend to serve the most vulnerable populations. Poorest, people with physical disabilities or behavioral health issues, kids, you know, really vulnerable people. And that's, you know, we pride ourselves on that. As we've heard and we'll see, the market doesn't take care of everybody. We know that. And housing authorities and HUD are the ways that the most vulnerable in this country get taken care of. Problem is, as I said, we need about 4 times as much money, but I think we and the people in this room do as much as we can with it. So this is kind of a this is, you know, we hear about vouchers, we hear about public housing. So this really just lays out what we're talking about. The Housing Choice Voucher Program, that's where you get a voucher from a housing authority and you use it basically anywhere you want to within a payment standard and rent an apartment from a private landlord. Here in Skokie, they just sent me the number. I think we have 249 vouchers. Let's go, 249. So that's the mobile program, right? The project-based voucher, in some of the buildings that we saw Peter and David talk about, have project-based vouchers attached to them. So that means that the unit itself is subsidized. The tenant, just like in the tenant-based program, pays 30% of their rent, and the voucher pays the rest. But again, in this second case, the voucher is tied to the property. And then finally, public housing is, which most people know and understand. These are the 18 buildings that we own and operate, and I think there's 3,200 housing authorities in the country. So some own 10 units, and NYCHA in New York has 650,000. So that's the range. So we do some different things with the programs. You know, this pandemic was a terrible thing, obviously, but it created some really incredible federal programs came out of it. The Emergency Rental Assistance Program, where people who lost their jobs during the pandemic, we actually administered the program for the county and helped 21,000 people stay in their homes or apartments. Spent $161 million. So the other things that we have done are veterans. There's a special set aside every year from Congress for VASH vouchers to veterans. We administer about 600 of those. We're actually about to close on a project at Chicago Heights, where we're going to build 84 new units of veterans housing. This is a question I know you get asked. Elected officials get asked all the time. We get asked all the time. And the questions and queries come more now than they ever have. So these are the basics here. 46,000 for a family of four is 50% of the median. That qualifies you for all of these programs that I talked about. Now, we also have programs that are targeted to different populations. Our building here in Skokie is a senior designated building, but there are also people with disabilities that live there. That's by federal law. This one is something that, this is the latest thing in public housing. It really enabled us to rehab Albert Skokie here, the Armand King, excuse me. And every building in our portfolio got rehabbed through RAD and low-income housing tax credits. So when you see RAD, it really means public housing that allows us to operate a little more like private owners. We can get a first mortgage, for example. We can get other types of federal subsidies that you couldn't get in the public housing program. Wait lists. That's you know, I mentioned the need, right? When we opened the waiting list in November of 2020 for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the list hadn't been open in 15 years. We actually, in 5 days, got 60,000 applications. We had to do a lottery because I couldn't, in good conscience, put 60,000 people on a list because there'd be no hope of them ever reaching the top. We did a lottery to get it to 10,000. And we're actually leasing off of that list now. But I think it underscores the you know, and some of the numbers that we saw from Jonathan, you know, this lower income band. And it's not just a very low anymore, right? It's middle income folks too. That just can't afford housing for the reasons we've heard. It's really expensive to build and maintain. We also have site-based waiting lists. So from time to time, our lists do open, and we do let the local officials know. And that's a good opportunity for people to, you know, we advertise it. You can advertise it at the village hall, and people can get their name on the site-based list, and within 2 years get housed. So, you know, there's not a lot of new supply, unfortunately, but there is some turnover and opportunity. These last are really more to talk about what we do on the human side. I don't think it's enough to just, you know, own the property, rehab it, and collect people's rents. We don't operate that way. So we have a number of programs that try to lift residents. For example, we have a program where if you're going to college and you need a, you know, you can't pay for a computer, we will get you the computer. You know, you show us the transcript and we provide the computer. It's things like that, I think, that make the difference in a lot of people's lives. Homeownership. This is the program we're building. We heard a lot about single family homes here. You can actually own a home with a voucher. It's a little complicated, but we have about 100 people that are in that situation. this is a program where we, what's happened over the years is voucher holders really got, in truth, forced into certain communities because the rent would only be so much, right? So the rent was, just say for the sake of argument, the voucher would be $750. All right. You can't get a lot of house or apartment for $750. So obviously, voucher holders then were forced to congregate into certain areas. Well, in the last few years, that's changed somewhat. We were one of the first housing authorities in the country to use this new program that sets the rent by zip code. So it opened up huge areas for people. And, it's a lot fairer to the landlord because, as we've heard, people aren't just going to write down the rent because they're altruistic. We knew we had to have the ability to pay the rent. And this is a program that's growing. Now every single, all 19 major metropolitan areas have to use this program. We were one of the first to use it, but now it's mandated. Family self-sufficiency. And thank you.
Next we have Mr. Rob Anthony. And you're with the Community Partners for Affordable Housing.
Correct, yep. That looks like, what's this one? Yep. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to come. Yep. 1 second, I'm so sorry. All right. So thank you for inviting us and letting us speak a little bit about what Community Partners for Affordable Housing does and some of the projects that we have done in some of the other nearby communities. Before I get started, I want to spend just a minute on this cover slide because the pictures tell a really good story about really what we're about, who we are, what we do. This first picture on the left is Jose and his family. He's a waiter at Walker Brothers, and he is an extremely hard worker. He saves like crazy, but despite all that, he's in a lower paid job, and he could not earn enough to afford market rate housing in the community. And he really wanted to buy a home in the community where he grew up and where he worked. And through our community land trust program, he was able to do that. There's no way that he would have been able to do that through traditional market rate housing. He's been in that house for, it's got to be close to 10 years now. The next photo is Jackie and her daughter. Her daughter has cerebral palsy. When we first met Jackie, she was taking care of her daughter. She was working full-time at UPS, and she was in nursing school full-time. And about 2 years ago, she graduated with her nursing degree, and her income has since risen. But we placed her in SEPA housing, housing that was accessible for her daughter, that she could actually move her daughter around in. And Jackie and her daughter are thriving now, and she credits that stability of the housing that SEPA provided as being a major factor that enabled her to get her nursing degree and sort of move up the ranks in her career. The next photo is Sabrina. She has never had anyone in her household own a home before. She drastically wanted to own a home. She wanted to make sure her children were in a safe neighborhood within good school districts, and she had no idea where to start. So she went through our first our home buyer education program, and then our pre-purchase housing counseling program, and then our down payment assistance program that enabled her to buy her home. So she's now building equity, building intergenerational wealth, and also thriving. The next photo is Michael and Phyllis. They were retirees who wanted to stay in the community after they retired, and they could not afford to stay on their lower income in retirement. They bought a SEPA home and are able to stay in the community. The next photo is Jonathan. He's a young man who's in a wheelchair. He tells his story in a short video on our website if you want to hear it directly from him. But through our home rehab program and our home accessibility program, we built a ramp on his home and also took care of some other life safety and health issues like a broken sewer line. And he was not able to get in and out of his home before that. He credits that program for helping him maintain his independence and really avoid institutionalization somewhere outside of the community. The next photo is Tom. He's an EMT. He lost his job temporarily. And when he lost his job, his house went into foreclosure. He went through our foreclosure prevention program, was able to get a loan modification to keep his home. He now has a new job and he's thriving, but he didn't lose his home. Kiana, the next photo, she has 3 children with special needs. She actually had a housing choice voucher or a Section 8 voucher, but she could not find any landlord with a 3-bedroom unit that would accept her voucher. So she had nowhere to go. She came through the program. She's been living in one of our rental units for probably 6 or 7 years or more as well. The last photo is Angelique. She went through a divorce, wanted to keep her kids in the same school system, couldn't afford to stay in the community without affordable housing. She was able to do that through a SEPA home. So these are very sort of typical stories. We've served thousands and thousands of residents now, but these are very typical types of stories that we see. And it just sort of gives you a flavor of what we do. Our mission is to develop affordable housing and provide services that empower individuals and families to secure and retain quality housing. So we are a nonprofit organization that works in the northern suburbs. Our vision is thriving communities, diverse housing, and successful residents. I think thriving communities and successful residents sort of speaks for itself. But diverse housing, what we mean by that is that our mission is not to make every home in a community affordable. What we're trying to do is make sure that communities have that broad range of housing to serve people at different income levels and different needs. There's housing for seniors, there's housing for families, there's housing for persons with disabilities, there's a range of income levels. And in a lot of ways, that's the way a lot of communities were years ago. There was a broader range of income levels, and that's really gone by the wayside. This chart sort of again shows why we do what we do. That bottom line is the increase in household incomes between 1960 and 2017. That middle line is the increase in rental prices during that same time period. The top line is the increase in home prices during that same period. And so what you see is that home prices have increased at 4 times the rate of income since 1960, and rent prices have increased at twice the rate of income since 1960. So there's this growing gap that makes housing unaffordable. It's a structural problem, and that's what we're trying to address. So SEPA has, we're a very broad range we offer a very broad range of affordable housing programs, but they basically fall into 4 buckets, either helping people buy homes, helping people rent homes, helping people repair homes, or helping people save their homes. On the buy side, we are a HUD certified housing counseling agency. So we do a lot of pre-purchase education and counseling to prepare people for successful and responsible home ownership. We also do a lot of financial literacy training. We have down payment assistance programs to help people overcome that barrier to get into housing. And then we develop our own affordable housing. We develop through new construction, anywhere from single family homes up to 120 unit developments. And we do a lot of rehab work as well. On the rental side, we have rental assistance programs, both COVID related rental assistance programs, but also ongoing rental assistance programs. On the repair side, we have home repair and accessibility grants. We can offer up to $40,000 in forgivable loans to people to make life safety, health, and code improvements on their homes or accessibility improvements. The accessibility programs specifically, we can go in and put $10,000, $15,000 of improvements into someone's home. And it can enable them to stay in their home for years to come and prevent institutionalization. The alternative is to go to a nursing home and pay, $4, $5, $6 more $1,000 per month in a nursing home versus a one-time repair. And then on the foreclosure side, we provide a lot of foreclosure counseling. We also provide the counseling for the Lake County foreclosure mediation program. So anyone who gets a foreclosure summons in Lake County gets a notice with the summons. They can contact us and enroll in a mediation program. And that mediation program puts an immediate 2-month stay on the foreclosure proceedings, while we try to help link people with financial assistance or loan modifications or other resolutions to keep their home. So just to give you an idea of some of the work that we do, David mentioned the Community Land Trust program. These homes are in our Community Land Trust program in Highland Park and Lake Forest. The way that the Community Land Trust program works is that we will either develop new housing or we'll acquire and rehab housing. And then we sell the home only to low to moderate income households, and that the land underneath the home stays with the nonprofit, stays with the Community Land Trust. And so what that essentially does is it takes the land value out of the equation, which is a major factor that drives up the cost of housing. And as David also mentioned, it's expensive to do single family homes. If you might need to put $150,000 subsidy into a house to make it affordable. If it costs you $350,000 to buy and rehab a house and you're going to sell it for $200,000, that's a big subsidy for one house. And so what the Community Land Trust model does is it keeps that subsidy essentially with the land. And so that subsidy stays with that house forever. That home stays affordable forever. So there's a ground lease that leases the land to the buyer of the home. And that ground lease has a resale restriction. So when someone decides they want to sell their home, they have to sell it to another low to moderate income household. And the resale restriction allows them to capture the equity that they put into the house and some appreciation, but it caps the appreciation. So the home stays affordable to the next buyer, and then the next buyer, and the next buyer. So it creates this permanent infrastructure of affordable housing in the community. These are some of the new construction projects that we've done. On the top left are some senior cottages in Lake Forest. The middle is an adaptive reuse of an old factory in Mundelein. At the bottom right, those are Zion Senior Cottages, 110 units in Zion. We also do rehab. So this was a home in Round Lake Park. We work with a lot of municipalities where we say, okay, give us a list of your worst properties and we'll go after them. We completed a project last year with Round Lake Beach and Mundelein where we completed 50 homes like this. They're sort of the worst homes. This was one in Round Lake Park that the village got a hold of. They typically call us, we go out and look to see if we think the home is salvageable. This one was very borderline. We said, okay, we do think we can salvage this one. This house here, take a good look, turned into this house. So again, this one from this to that. So we do a lot of that type of work. So it's really providing a double benefit of providing affordable housing, but also improving the housing stock and cleaning up blighted properties and getting them back on the tax roll and occupied. We're very creative in our work. The picture in the bottom middle, we're one of the first in Lake County, or probably the first in Lake County, to use modular construction for affordable housing. This was done in a partnership with North Chicago, where they were really interested in increasing their home ownership rate. And so the city had 8 lots that they donated to us. We built 8 single-family homes. They also gave us another lot where we did a rental project for homeless veterans. On the right there, the bottom right, this is a partnership that we have with Evanston Township High School. It's called Geometry and Construction, and they actually build a house on the ETHS campus every year. The city donates a lot to SEPA, and at the end of the year, the house is moved to the lots. We sell it as affordable housing. The sales proceeds go back to the high school to fund the house the next year. So I think we've completed 8 homes now through that program. The bottom left, this is actually one of the oldest buildings in Lake County. It was originally called the Central Hotel in Mundelein, and it was a nuisance for the village for 10+ years. We were able to get it through the Abandoned Housing Rehab Act, rehab it, turned into rental housing. The top middle project, there's one house in particular in Mundelein that the village really wanted us to take care of. We could not figure out a way to make the numbers work. There happened to be a house about a half a mile away that was going to be torn down, and it was actually a very nice house. And so we got the property that the village wanted and torn down. We tore that house down. We loaded the good house up on a truck, moved it half a mile down the road, and it's a great house. That has a low to moderate income household in it. We talked a little bit about inclusionary housing before. So we helped the city of Highland Park administer their inclusionary housing program, as well as Evanston, Northbrook. We're working with Libertyville right now to adopt an ordinance. And the way, I'm not sure how much people have talked about inclusionary before, but typically the way that inclusionary works is that it's a city ordinance that requires developers, when they're building new housing, they need to set aside a certain percentage of that housing as affordable. That's often 10%, 15%, maybe 20% of the units. In Highland Park, it's 20%. These were actually the first affordable units that were built under the inclusionary housing program in Highland Park. And the way that the ordinance works is that affordable units can be smaller and the interior finishes can be a little bit different, but on the outside, they really need to blend in. So if you look at these 2 doors on the left, those are market rate units that sold for about $1 million a piece. The 2 doors on the right are the affordable units, and one sold for about $165,000 for a household at 80% of AMI, and one sold for about $250,000 for a household at 120% of area median income. You can see that the right side is a little bit smaller, and the way that they structured it is that one unit is the first floor and half of the second floor, and then the second unit is the other half of the second floor and the third floor. What we found, and some other inclusionary photos here, these are some other inclusionary projects in Highland Park. These are some in Evanston. I believe we have around 50 inclusionary units so far in Highland Park and around 50 in Evanston, but several more on their way. And what we found is that inclusionary really works. A well-designed inclusionary housing program has cost offsets that are built into the ordinance. So you have typically density bonuses or FAR increases that are allowed, perhaps reduced parking, fee waivers for the affordable units, things like that help offset the cost of creating the affordable units. We've done a lot of modeling, financial modeling around inclusionary, particularly for larger developments. If developers are able to take advantage of those costs offset, there's usually a fairly minimal or very minimal financial impact on the developments.
So what is the square footage, the one you have in Highland Park?
So the different communities have different ways of doing it. Some communities say that the affordable units need to be no less than 75% of the market rate units, for example. In Highland Park, there are minimum square footage that are required for inclusionary. So I don't remember them offhand. I think a 3-bedroom is around 1,200 square feet. A 2-bedroom is maybe 900, and a 1-bedroom 600 or 700, something like that, as minimum sizes. So, I mean, lastly, what we always say is access to safe and affordable housing is just fundamental. Without it, everything else falls apart. And there are all kinds of national studies out there that document these things, but we've seen it firsthand in all of our programs as well, that when people are in housing they can afford, there's clear evidence that children perform better in schools. People get jobs, they keep jobs, they advance in their careers. There's all kinds of evidence around the improvements in physical and mental health outcomes. Families plan for the future and they have that long-term housing stability. They build intergenerational wealth and financial stability. And lives just sort of simply come together when they're in housing that they can afford. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay, thank you.
Finally, we have Richard Koenig from the Housing Opportunity Development Corporation. Mike, Koenig.
Good evening. My name is Richard Koenig. I'm the Executive Director of Housing Opportunity Development Corporation. Ditto. Everything they said. So I was trying to think of interesting things to talk about this evening as I get to back cleanup. Hopefully they've saved the best for last. Have you asked yourself, who is doing affordable housing development in Skokie? Well, it's us. HODC is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We've been around since 1986, and we did our first affordable housing here in Skokie in 1987. The organization, we've completed over 500 affordable units. Our office is located up on Lincoln Avenue, and we do affordable housing throughout the suburbs. So you may have noticed we all know each other. We've all partnered together. The organization, we all sort of sat together because we're all friends. We do this development together. We do the same type of work. It takes a lot of effort to put projects and developments like this together. So trying to think of things that would be interesting or different than what they have said. So as a nonprofit organization, the thing that we do the real estate development piece, primarily rental housing, although we've done some home ownership, but we also do the property management. We manage all the buildings that we have developed. So we're managing properties here in Skokie. We've completed 8 different projects, including some properties. We bought some 4 flats in Skokie that were in foreclosure, and we're able to rehab them, turn them around, and provide permanent supportive housing for people with disabilities here in Skokie. The financing mechanism is the thing that makes housing affordable, and we can help access funds. It's really a public-private partnership on how to put these developments together. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. If we were to start today and doing a new affordable housing project, we would be really fortunate if we could put it in the ground in 3 to 4 years minimum. Many of these projects that we've worked on take 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 years. So doing, especially new developments, acquisition and rehab of existing properties takes a little bit less time, but it does take a long time. So there is not one magic bullet. You sort of asked what's the best way to do it. I don't think there is one best way. The types of developments that we and our colleagues have done include new construction, they include rehab. It includes rental housing, it includes home ownership. It targets seniors, it targets working families, people who work in the communities, seniors who've raised their families in the communities, and people with disabilities who need access to the supportive services that they provide in the community. We're able to do those. So I have a couple of examples of pictures. You saw some of the great pictures that other developers have done, but really it's trying to find a way to access funding sources and be able to provide this housing that serves population that you want to serve. There is not one monolithic group of people who need affordable housing. Typically, the bell curve of people who live in our housing is people making between $20,000 and $40,000 per year. People that can afford rent, they can afford to pay for their housing, they just can't afford to pay what's on the market. And the reason is market housing is much more expensive. So by putting the layers of subsidy together, by putting government financing together, we're able to provide those funding sources. Here in Skokie and in other communities throughout the northern suburbs, we've been able to do these types of developments. As you can see, it's really attractive. So when you go to someone and say, what is affordable housing? They often have in their mind something that the public housing, the housing projects, the big monolithic projects. Affordable housing now is community-based housing. It's smaller developments. It fits in the fabric of the community. It's hopefully unnoticeable. If I were to take you on my projects here in Skokie and point out on the street and say, I have a building on the street, find the one that's affordable. Hopefully, you'd say, that's the best building on the block. That must be the affordable one. That's the goal with affordable housing today, is how do we make it high quality housing? How do we provide that? As was mentioned earlier, it's really expensive to do good. It's expensive to do affordable housing. It's expensive on the front side in order to be lower cost on the back side. So there's a range of options that are needed. One of the new options that we're working on right now is accessory dwelling units. We're doing this in Evanston. It's the first affordable accessory dwelling unit in Evanston. We're trying to show that that model of taking advantage of space that's available behind houses is an option. So it takes looking at vacant lots. It takes looking at single family homes. It takes looking at existing properties. How can you build in? It involves the development community. Rob mentioned inclusionary housing. How do you get the development? You can't just rely on affordable housing developers to do the affordable housing work that you need done. You need to rely on market rate developers who include affordable units within their overall developments. So it takes a mix of all those pieces to put together in order to make the housing affordable. But it does serve folks that are valuable members of our community. It's not bringing in outsiders. What we find is that 75 to 80% of the people who come to our developments are people who are currently living in the community, but they're paying too much for their housing, or they work in the community and they're driving too far to get to housing. Imagine if you lived near your job. If more people could live near their jobs, how much less crowded the roads would be. So there are knockoff benefits. There's the ability to live closer to where you work. Your kids go to school in the communities where you work, and you can afford the housing that you live in. We have folks who've lived in our affordable housing. I've been the executive director for 25 years now. I've run HODC. We have tenants who've been in our buildings for longer than I've been here. We have families who've grown up, who've raised their kids have gone off to school, they've gone off to college. And in fact, we had a tenant who lives here in Skokie who moved out a couple years ago. I said, why are you leaving now? She said, I raised my kids went to school, my kids graduated from college. I want to give somebody else a chance. So there are so many stories like that. Rob told the stories about the families who live with them. But so affordable housing is complicated. It's hard to do. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of tools. You need to have a toolkit that takes all those things into account. So hopefully we've been able to sort of crack that ice for you and give you some examples of what's possible. And we're available to help answer those questions. All of us are available to you to try and figure out a way. We're working with your former director, Pete Pyre, works with HODC to help us work on some projects. We have the ability, we have the resources to help navigate what it takes to put a plan together and then implement that plan. So hopefully we can answer those questions and help you through that process. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, Peter?
Yeah. The representative from CMAP provided some demographics and some data for us to digest. You mentioned the project cycle of an affordable housing project. These are typically not,
Not quick.
they're not quick. So if the assumption is, split the numbers you gave in half and say it's 5 years, if it's reasonable to assume that we're talking about life cycles that are comparable to that, and we're engaging in an exercise to try to understand, try to digest the demographics that we've been presented, which you've indicated are some number of years old in some respects. How do we make the most informed decisions given data and trends? I think the gentleman who was up just before you showed a graphic that went like this and like this and like this and like, and we know there were some specific things that happened around 2008 and some other points, and we're going through one right now, which are having a dramatic impact on the price of housing. How do you have any suggestions, best practices? I'm not looking for a silver bullet, but to help us make some regional policy decisions, given the fact that, what we're discussing now might be misaligned with what the reality is when these policies we would implement are having an impact on what's being built.
I think having a comprehensive approach. You can't say we're gonna, a development, a project is, let's say it's 20 units or 40 units or 60 units. That's not going to address the issue. I think having the communities that have been successful, the communities that we've worked in, who have comprehensive plans that look at long term, by having a bunch of different options. So you want to have a project done every few years, a project that gets built, a development that's going to be affordable for the long term, that minimum of 30-year affordability. That's great. But you also, I think it's helpful to have the tools of sort of the tools that were mentioned before. We put those all in the toolbox of having some funding that's available that's coming to the village, maybe through tear down tax or through TIF or whatever. So there's funding available to do developments. There's having the development community through passing an inclusionary zoning ordinance, which makes market rate developers, when they come and they build a building, as those new developments happen, they're building some amount of affordable units. Maybe not a lot, 10%, 15%, but it's better than 0%. And over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, those will continue to be affordable over time. By allowing things like accessory dwelling units, by having those different pieces, by having all of those options available and encouraging all those proactively as a community, you start to move towards that direction. You're not going to achieve the goal, but as you're moving towards that goal, I think that's the idea. That's the mindset that I would have as a community, is I can't reach the goal, but how do I start moving towards it? And what are all the pieces that I can put into place that allow that to happen? We want luxury housing, we want middle income housing, and we want affordable housing as a community, right? We sort of want all those things, but most of what's being built now is being designed, especially as luxury housing. We have a good housing stock. There are affordable homes currently in the community. How do we keep those? How do we maintain those? How do we encourage those while also encouraging new development to bring new people to help revitalize the community? You need all those things.
Just one follow-up. The Brinshard presentation indicated zoning changes as one of the suggestions, recommendations. Much of the images that were in the subsequent presentations, and I think some of what I'm hearing from you, references developments that are in existing residential communities. Aside from transforming housing stock or taking advantage of vacant lands that are in communities that are already zoned residential, are there other zoning classifications or types of vacant properties that are better suited to be transformed into affordable housing? And likewise, are there others that in your experience are particularly challenging if you try to transform them in that way?
I think that's an interesting question, because I think it's a balance. Existing housing is typically zoned for single family use. Most of what we do is multifamily, because there's economies of scale of doing it. There's a reason that we do developments. And of course, we show our projects because we're developers. We like showing off the buildings we've built, right? Showing a house by house isn't exciting, isn't as sexy as that. So doing adaptive reuse, whether it's in industrial areas, commercial areas, retail areas, is another strategy. And figuring out where those are, we can find ways to make those changes. We often, as affordable housing developers, find the least desirable sites and transform them. That's how some of the projects that they've mentioned, we become the heroes, because we took a really, really bad site that nobody wanted and couldn't figure out what to do with it, whether it's contaminated or was a bad location, and we've transformed that. And we've transformed it into something that's an asset for the community, right? A feather in our cap. It also helps benefit a long-term asset for the community. We're looking at a project right now in an industrial zone up in Northbrook, where it's industrial for a long time. There's stuff that's in the ground, but it's near the train station, right? And so it's going to create transit-oriented development. It's going to create housing near transportation. It's a mixed income project, so there's some luxury housing and there's some affordable housing. So those types of units. So there's not a worse space and there's not a best space. It's where's the political will to get that project done, because it's going to take zoning approval. It's going to take, there are going to be neighbors who come out against it. There's going to be neighbors. There's going to be NIMBY if you're not in my backyard. In fact, I don't think I've ever met anybody against affordable housing in my whole life. They're only against it here. Over there, perfect. There's nobody who's against it until you find their spot. So what it takes is that political will to say, this is our plan for our community, and we're going to find bad ways, bad places to do it. They're going to turn into good assets for the community. So I haven't answered your question directly, but there isn't a specific, it depends. It depends. It's always what resources can we bring together to make it be successful. That's what it takes.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Very welcome.
Well, that concludes our speakers. And I wish to thank each and every one of the speakers that we get tonight for coming in tonight and giving the presentation. At this point, we'll open up the floor to people in the audience to come up and answer questions. But let me warn you, your questions may not be answered tonight. We will take your questions into account and your opinions. And we will digest your questions and we'll try and spit something out at our next meeting in February. So anybody who wants to come up and speak? Can I ask that you please give us your name? Can you come up? And speaking for the mic.
First, are we allowed to ask questions?
Excuse me, we have a sign sheet. Yeah, there's a sign sheet there. If you give us your name and address and phone number or email address, we will contact you or let you know anything that we may allow pertaining to the meeting. And again, if you go home and you realize you forgot to answer questions, we do have a website set up specifically for affordable housing, and it's housing@skokie.org, and that's housing with an uppercase H.
Are we allowed to ask questions to the speakers who presented?
You can ask us the question.
Okay, my name is Lauren Bednicki. I live at 8818. And I have a question for the first speaker where he had the horizontal bar charts and he had like 50% of their income and then 30 to 50% of the income and for 2 different time periods. So my question is, and it looked like the people who were in the 50% of the income like category, that category got smaller and the other category got slightly smaller. But my question is, which direction did those people go? Like, did they go to, they're now paying more than 50% of their income or they're now paying less than 30% of their income?
Yes.
You want me to get it? Sure. Let's do this.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that. To be honest, that's one of those questions where there's only so much information we can get from the U.S. Census Bureau, right? We're not going to follow up on like this person answered this time and they answered something slightly different in a survey a few years later. We're sort of looking at larger, bigger picture trends. And we haven't gone in. Oh, of course, absolutely. We also haven't gone in quite as much detail as you could in terms of looking at which populations are most impacted, which ones are more cost burdened, by income, by other forms of different demographics, by age. And so those are all, again, additional levels of detail that you can drill into as you start wrestling with the sorts of questions that the speakers sort of talked about in some of the other presentations.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'm Judy Mendel. I just have a question for the CMAP guy. He's not listening right now. I'll ask my other question. So I have a question. How does it work with the condos that become affordable housing? If they're not in a land trust, how do they stay affordable? No, they'll answer later or?
So there are resale restrictions on them.
Oh, on all of them, even if they're not in a land trust, when you sell the house, there's resale. Oh, interesting. And my question for the CMAP guy was just, I want to make sure he knows 60203 is Skokie.
Thank you.
You know, 60203 is Skokie, right? In your data?
Oh, okay.
Not
Do you?
Evanston.
Yep.
Any
Sorry.
other questions?
Because it's Evanston, 203 Evanston, but it's Skokie.
I'm not sure I understand.
There's a section. There's a zip code. Like the Skevinston area.
Good evening. My name is Samina Hussain and I work at District 219, now Township High School. Also serve on Gulf School District 67, which is in Morton Grove. And I have also been on a Community Relations Commission in Morton Grove as well. And so I have some background knowledge on fair housing. I just want to impress on the village of Skokie how important your consideration of fair housing, or sorry, affordable housing is to the community and to the students who attend our schools. Currently, I don't have any hard data with me, but I do know that we have at least close to 40 homeless students that are attending Niles West. We have 30% plus families who are on free and reduced, whose children are on free and reduced lunch. And this is probably the case at all the centers as well, very similar percentages. I just wanted to make sure that you knew how important it is to factor the affordable housing in our communities so that these students, as one of the gentlemen pointed out, have some stability in their lives and are able to achieve in their academic in the academic areas in school, and how that safety and security is very important. And I think the families and these students need it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to say a couple of things, and this is just really a suggestion. I come to a lot of the board meetings, and if they're on a Tuesday, because Monday was a holiday, I'm late every Tuesday because I work out of the home one day a week, and that's Tuesdays. The fact that these 3 meetings are all on a Thursday at the same time could be limiting the number of people who are able to come to share their own concerns. And I would like to see a way to reach those people who may work evenings, who Thursday at 7:30, 3 meetings in a row may just not work for them. Maybe Thursday's the only night they can't get childcare. So I'd like you to just think about that. There are people who have a hard time getting out. And the other thing that I wanted to say is, I know you mean well when communications come out touting Skokie being 19% higher than the state mandate. This is not just about the mandate, and I appreciate so much what you guys are doing right now. But what the state is mandating does not dictate what Skokie needs. The state mandate is the bare minimum. And even if we're twice the bare minimum, but we still have homeless people going to our schools, it's a problem, and Skokie needs to do something. Whatever the other municipalities are doing, we need to do something. We need to take care of our own. Skokie welcomes everyone. We need to house everyone.
Hello, my name is William Feinstone, longtime Skokie resident. I just had a question whether there's any data out there, any of the experts that spoke tonight know of any data out there, positive or negative, on the impact of these programs on existing residents of the community. Do they tend to increase their property values, reduce their property values, increase their taxes, or reduce their taxes?
There's been some recent studies that actually done at Harvard that have shown just that. We had some other ancillary information, but there's a definitive study. I'll share that with the staff and they can share that with you.
Okay, thank you, because I hope that that's something that the village would consider as they're deciding on what plan or what route to undertake here. Thank you.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that is usually what people who don't like affordable housing talk about.
Well,
So just to say into the
I'm not in that. I have an open mind here. I'd just like to know the facts. Okay.
Just to say into the microphone for the purpose of the recording, the gentleman from Bridgeshore is suggesting there's a research study done by Harvard. You suggested
it was Harvard, but I have it, so I said.
So he's going to identify that source and provide it to you.
Could you give us that data for the next meeting? Hopefully, if I remember, I'm getting old. I'll send it to you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Sure doesn't forget anything.
I am Gail Schechter, 9033 Beach Heating. And I wanted to thank all of you for doing these hearings. This has been a wonderful, really educational time. And I actually know all of the people who spoke today, and they all have so many years of experience and a lot worth hearing from. I wanted to just say a couple of things. One about inclusionary zoning, the concept behind it, which is really important because we're seeing developers coming in and giving ideas. The idea behind such a policy is that you capture as affordable units that would have been created anyway. So if we were going to have a building anyway, why not have 15–20% of them as affordable? So that was the thinking process behind the Affordable Housing Planning and Appeal Act. And by the way, I serve on the State Housing Appeals Board that enforces that act. But I wanted you to know that that was the thought process behind that. And now that we're seeing so much interest in Skokie, that's why inclusionary zoning makes sense. And then the other thing I wanted to say, wearing my hat, is I'm the executive director of Housing Opportunities and Maintenance for the Elderly, or HOME, in Chicago. We are an affordable housing provider and a developer, and just wanted to share a couple of things that were not mentioned here. One was when you talk about different segments of the population, we heard about seniors, people with special needs, and families with children. But what HOME does is we do intergenerational housing, because our founders, they said, life doesn't segregate by age, so why should we? So we house seniors, families with children, and younger adults, and we have part of our housing where they actually live communally as a sort of family of choice. And I just want to throw that into the mix. I thought it was really important what Peter Levovey said, that a lot of the impetus comes from the community. The municipality came to the developer. But a good thing too about smaller nonprofits are not going to solve the housing problem, but what they can do is provide some really cool and innovative ideas. So while some of the stuff that HOME does can't scale up and serve thousands of people, the 200,000 units that are supposedly, that are a shortage in the Chicago metro area, supporting them can help come up with some really creative solutions, because the bottom line is we are talking about trying to have a gamut of housing choices in our village. And then just the last thing about that is that using TIF funds, Skokie has TIF districts. TIF funds can be used to fund affordable housing, which is really good to know. I helped to actually change the state law to make that happen. And as I think Richard might have mentioned about transit-oriented development, you can also be giving increased points for developers. There are things you can do to incentivize transit-oriented development. And but thank you. Thanks for doing these hearings.
Thank you.
Oh, finally, I'm sorry, one last thing. I hope Westfield is listening to all of this so that when they come to the village, they will come with a mixed income development. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ibrahim Mansouri. I live at 9228 Lowell Avenue, Skokie. First of all, I want to commend the village for taking this big work of affordable housing, increased percentage of affordability, because really speaking, some of the developer side folks say that affordable housing actually is affordable to the people who live there, but affordable housing is not affordable to the people who develop the actual developments, because of so many restrictions. The affordable developers have so many restrictions they have to go through. So actually it costs more than the actual market rate unit sometimes. And that includes so many restrictions of either federal government, state government, or the local government, like the percentage of requirement. One of the gentlemen mentioned about certain labor force where you have to hire those federal prevailing wage rate employees and so on and so forth. And one more thing, which is very important to Skokie, I believe, I don't have statistics right now, maybe the planning folks have it, but the demographic, the elderly population, as we go more and more, we live longer and longer. And the requirement of living older people in the same housing is difficult as far as the accessibility concerned. And affordable housing, of course, has certain percentile of requirement, but that's not enough. Because that law was made so many years back when people were dying in 60s and 70s. Now people live up to 90s. And the requirement is more and more affordable housing plus the accessibility. So as we go further, as far as village is concerned, please keep that in mind, that as you increase the affordability percentage, increase the accessibility percentage, because that's very, very important, and it is specifically important for Skokie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Buenas noches, good evening. My name is Astrid Suarez. I lived in Skokie 4 years ago. I appreciate the communication and conversation today about public housing. It is very important. And it has some kind of questions to reflect about how the village is going to lead this process. Thing one is about what is the quality of life for Skokie residents? What is the plan? What are the strategies? And the housing is a key strategy for quality of life, but also for equity and access. I think that the testimonies that were given by some speakers here, testimonies were instrumental in talking about we have homeless children. So how we are going to respond with equity and quality. And affordable housing is key. So the question I want to leave you today, all of you and all of you here, is about we are looking for affordable housing for who? Who are the population? Who are the target population? And what type of affordable housing we are willing to build? How creative we need to become in having a very rich, diverse, and equitable community in Skokie. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've noticed that on the website, I must have a typo on my sheet that does have an uppercase H, but I guess it's all lowercase.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. Very good. Any other questions, comments? Well, I thank all of you for coming out. And I hope that you'll all come back for our February 2nd meeting. And again, if you have any questions or comments, please refer to our website.